Hello everyone. Welcome to the 92nd Street Y Online. I'm Lucas Whitman, the Executive Director of the Unterberg Center for Poetry and Literature here at the 92nd Street Y, and we're so thrilled to welcome you for this special conversation between the great Israeli writer David Grossman and Joshua Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
My name is Joshua Cohen, and I'm very honored to be speaking today with David Grossman, who is the author most recently in English of the book, The Thinking Heart. Am I holding it up? The Thinking Heart. I want to thank everyone for joining us virtually. I'm speaking from New York, and where are you, David?
First, shalom and good evening. Good to be here. And here is Mevaseret Zion, a place 10 minutes away from Jerusalem.
And it's evening. It's evening there on Yom HaShoah. Actually, is when we're speaking on Holocaust Remembrance Day. I wanted to begin by asking you a question about an earlier set of tragedies. There were 120 years ago, there were, after these pogroms in the Russian Empire, Shalom Aleichem first came here to New York. And I had read that reading Shalom Aleichem was one of your first reading experiences, which in an Israeli context might seem somewhat strange, a context that was trying to sort of neglect or forget its Yiddish. And I wanted to just kind of begin with that. What do you remember about that encounter with Aleichem?
As you said, it was my first reading experience. I was, I think, 8 or some months later than 8 years old, when my father entered my room and he handed me a little book, thick, little red cover, and he said, "Take it, David." David is the way he used to call me. By the way, he passed away exactly today, a year ago, at the age of 97. And he's a very important person in my life and meaningful. He said, "Take it, David. This is how it used to be over there." Now, in the Israeli Jewish code, over there is the Holocaust. It's not a place usually, but an occurrence. And I took the book. There was something in the smile that my father smiled when he handed me the book, because he was quite an authoritative person. But when he gave me the book, there was a kind of a shy smile, a kind of almost apologetic, childlike smile in the corner of his lips. And I climbed on the window pane, which was my favorite place of reading, and I started to read. And in something like, I think, 5 minutes, I was taken totally by this book, by the story of Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is a pseudonym, a nickname. Shalom Aleichem means peace on you in Yiddish, in Hebrew. And I read there about a reality that I knew almost nothing of, a reality with people who drew water from the well, and about matchmakers, and about the Jews and the Gentiles. A new reality that took me by surprise. I think it is like a child today to be taken by the stories of Harry Potter. You know, you don't know anything, but you feel there is a huge reality there, with details, with institutes, with relationship, with attitudes, with politics, everything. And I read, I think on the first day, I read something like 100 pages. I noticed also that the pages were marked not with numbers, not with digits, but with letters, like the Bible or the Talmud, which made me think that I'm holding here a sacred book. And I swallowed it. I swallowed this book and the other 5 volumes of Shalom Aleichem. You know, I remember I told my best friends in the shikun, in the building where we lived, about Shalom Aleichem, and he gave me a very funny look, and I understood immediately that it's not really cool to talk about Shalom Aleichem in our neighborhood. It's not cool enough. So I kept it to myself, and I felt I had a kind of a secret underground from the childhood of my father in Dinov, Galicia, to my childhood in Jerusalem. And I think I didn't know that Shalom Aleichem didn't exist anymore, that he died, but even more so, I didn't know that this reality that he described, the reality of the Jews in the diaspora, in the little shtetl, that it stopped being, that it was murdered brutally. Only it took me one day in one of the memorial day for the Shoah and the heroism, some years ago from today exactly. And only then I realized that this reality has been exterminated. And it shook me in a brutal way. Now, every child, I think, has his first dead person, the person that he knew and died. So in a strange way, the heroes, the characters of Shalom Aleichem were my heroes and my reality. And I think it was the first time I understood, without verbalize it, of course, that there is a place where things can happen simultaneously, that they can be full of life and creativity and warmth, and at the same time full of nothingness and oblivion. And this place is art, is literature more than everything else, to be able to live the full being of something and the nothingness of it.
So to speak on the yard site of your father, you said your father worked, I know, as a bus driver until, because of his eyesight, he had to retire. And at that point, he ran. Correct me if I'm wrong. He ran the library of the Jerusalem public transport system, and apparently put together a library of some hundreds, if not thousands, of books. And I wanted to ask you about that library and about your early reading experiences.
As you said, he ran the library, and I would provide him with lists of books that I wanted to read, and he obeyed. He himself liked to read. So can you think what a wonderful dream it is that I walked there among the shelves, and each one that I wanted, I would point out and say, this, et ze. And I could take it home and read it for very short time. I read very quickly back then. Yeah.
So I want to move into a brief kind of leaving the world of fiction for the world of nonfiction for a little bit. In 1987, you have Zman Atzov, you have which was translated Yellow Wind into English, where you went into the occupied territories and came back with a magnificent set of reportage that was deeply new to most of the Israeli reading public and unsettling to them. And since then, the nonfiction, including this book that's currently out now, has been a part of your project, a part of your career. And I wanted to ask you about nonfiction, about is it a responsibility? Is it a temptation? Why does someone with so much, I want to say talent, but it's not, it's so much access to the world of magic and of fiction, descend into nonfiction?
Maybe there comes a moment that I need to shout, to cry out immediately, not to wait until a novel is being composed and putting into layers, but it's like a cry out. Of course, I prefer writing fiction. Writing fiction is something really amazing. The fact that you're making something of nothing, that there was nothing before, or very little question or reality, and you will give it life. You will give it life, and you will make it multidimensional. And I'm now in the heart of writing a new novella. I want to write novella because I love the form of novella, and some of the wonderful pieces of art, of literature, were written in a form of novella, like Mario and the Magician and Death in Venice of Thomas Mann, like Sipur Pashut, simple story of our Agnon, and many others. Of course, Kafka had many novellas. And I try, to find a way to combine the condensity of a novella with the depth of a novel. Not that novella is not deep enough, not at all. But the pleasure of suddenly finding more and more nuances of the story I want to write, as if it's roll itself like a very cunning carpet merchant. You entered the store of the carpets to buy something for the bathroom, and then you find yourself with huge 6 carpets on your shoulder.
You mentioned Agnon, and I wanted to say, there's a great story that when Saul Bellow, who was a great fiction writer, when he's writing nonfiction, he tells a story about being in Israel and meeting Agnon, and Agnon asks Bellow if any of his books have been translated yet into Hebrew, and Bellow says no. And Agnon says, well, that's unfortunate because only in Hebrew will they survive. Only in Hebrew will you be safe. And I wanted to ask you, is Hebrew still safe? And what future do you see the culture having?
No, I think like almost every field of life in Israel today, even the language is not safe. And maybe especially the language as a vehicle to understand life, to be in life. The feeling is, I don't know if you have been to Israel in the last year and a half since the massacre of October 7th. Have you been there?
A few times, yeah.
You have noticed probably the air of despair, of hopelessness, of understanding that we are on the verge of an avalanche, that we still do not understand the consequences of it. And above all, this feeling of being betrayed by our government, by our administration, who promised us that they will protect us and that we have the best air force and the best army in the whole world. And suddenly we found ourselves broken, shattered to pieces. I feel I do not have enough words to describe what I feel and what is the reality around me.
One of the essays in this book is a sort of cry, a hope for understanding. When you say that Israel itself is often treated abroad as if a fiction, a colonialist fiction. And I'm wondering how you as a fiction writer respond to your country being treated as fictional, as in a sense something invented and perpetrated on others.
Yeah, there is something of a story in the essence of Israel. We are the people of the book, and in a way we gave the book to the world. This is our great donation. We gave the book, we gave the ability to read reality as a text and to insist on the nuances of every reality. But right now, what I feel is that since reality is overflooding, and cannot be contained and cannot be decoded yet, it will take some decades, and I think until we understand what really had been done to us on this October 7th. And the feeling that we treat the reality with a language that is consist mainly by cliches. We don't have words, we don't have nuances, we have cliches. And the very usage of cliché is an insult for people who take pride in their sensitivity to the language. And you asked another thing which I lost you in.
No. I want to actually go into a book of yours that I love very, very much, that unites the two poles of your work that we've been speaking about, which is the fiction and the nonfiction. And this is your book about Shimshon, your book about Samson, and which was published in English a few years ago, I believe. And I wanted to ask you how you think about that biblical story now, that story that is famously the story of what happens when one ventures into Gaza, the fate of a strong man who is proven not strong enough and comes and engineers his own demise at the hands of the Philistines in Gaza. I was wondering whether that story has come back to you and whether that book of yours has come back to you since October 7th.
It did come back to me in the way I felt we must understand our approach, the Israelis' approach to power. Samson, Shimshon, the Nebuchadnezzar, as the poor Samson, as Prime Minister Levi Eshkol called him once and called Israelis once. His attitude towards the power that he has is unclear to him. He is doomed almost to use extra power to react more excessively and much more than needed when there is the slightest threat to him. And because of that, he is destructive to his environment and to himself. And he is yearning to understand himself. He does not understand. He is like a big riddle to himself. This is what I liked about him. It's an unsolved riddle, and we suffer from it, the Israelis, for too many years, because you cannot be so strong without making mistakes of strength, without being tempted to your abilities and your potential.
Also, in that book, there's a way in which you also treat him almost as childlike, a person who, like a child who does not understand his own power. And because of his inability to understand his power, that becomes, his ultimate downfall. And I was wondering, again, since October 7th, how you think about this story, how you think about this story of this man who does not understand his own power and finds himself coming to grief in Gaza.
We all know that power corrupts. If you have power, you tend to use it. It's almost inevitable. It's a great temptation to resist. And especially Samson, and especially a nation like the Jewish identity or the Israeli identity, who really are tempted all the time to use excessively their might. And I think that one of the conclusion of the last year and a half is that Israel, as strong as it is, cannot really win totally on its enemies. That we are doomed to fight and to live by the sword and to die by the sword. And we shall not win without the help, the very generous, essential help of our friends, especially the United States. And that leads me to the conclusion that the most important component of our peace situation, our situation in the future here, is to have peace with as many as possible Arab countries. We need them as they need us. We need the treatments and the allies and the bonds that we can create with as many Arab countries as possible. And for that, we also have to be very sensitive and wise, even in our attitude towards the Palestinians. We need them. We don't do them any favor by insisting that they will have a state of their own. We need them exactly as they need us. We have to find a situation that both peoples, the Israeli and the Palestinians, will live side by side, will identify their common interests, will understand that the fences between them are for their good, for their better life. There are many qualifications to the place of peace in our life. I'm talking to you about peace, but I myself did not have any one day of peace in my life. I never experienced what does it mean to live without existential danger. Is it possible to live under existential danger? What kind of person it creates, this situation? What kind of education it creates? What kind of a people grow up in an atmosphere of fear and suspicion and hatred?
I wanted to ask this question about where the left has gone. You as the avatar of the Israeli left, which has systematically crumbled. I mean, before October 7th, and has been severely hobbled since and dispersed abroad. I wanted to ask you how you relate to the international conversation of the left, which seems to take place in a parallel reality, where there are calls for a single state solution, which is not necessarily a solution that anyone on the ground, as you would say, wants or thinks is viable. I want to ask you about this dream of two states and why it has been so swiftly abandoned by the left.
I supported from the very beginning the solution of the two states. I felt that these two peoples, we and Palestinians, are not mature enough, not politically mature enough to have another political solution, which is the one state solution. The Israelis and the Palestinians cannot be cousins to each other, and we ask them suddenly to be seismic twins. We have to pass through some very difficult time and many difficult years until we shall have this maturity of being able to be generous to our enemies, to trust them, God forbid. After the 7th of October, of course, this is even less possible. And yet, I do not see any better solution. I say it painfully because I'm not sure that this solution, the two-state solution, would endure, would prevail. There's too much of bad blood, too much of fanaticism, too much of religion in the conflict to believe that we can overcome our basic primal urges and desires and emotions towards the other. And every day that passes without having peace between us and them is a dangerous, and it is a burning issue, burning position issue. But again, give me another idea, a better idea, and I might embrace it. Until now, I do not see any possible idea for that. On the contrary, I see growing extremism. I see growing suspicion and hateful and hatred. It takes a lot of optimism to believe that peace is possible between us and the Palestinians. But yet, I do not see any better solution. And I also think that even if in the beginning it will be a kind of a bad peace, a suspicious peace, but it might have a logic of its own. It might have instincts of its own. And more people might be swept into the wheel of goodwill. Are we there? No, we are far away from it.
I wanted to spent a lot of time in Israel. My wife and I spent our time between here and there, and the most striking kind of public experience there before October 7th were the weekly protests against the judicial coup, which would happen after every Shabbat. the streets would be flooded with people. And then since October 7th, a lot of the energy of that protest movement has been harnessed to the hostage forum, the families of hostages who, some of whom have been returned, but so many are still there. And I wanted to ask you, as a person who's, I know, has had attended these protests and has spoken at different protests. I know that in this book there's an address that you delivered at Habima Square a few years ago during the judicial coup. I wanted to ask you, as a novelist, as a person who the only way that you can get a book done is to sit alone, to have a solitary experience between you and the page or the screen, however you're writing. How does it feel to be out in the streets among all of these people? And what are you thinking about when you're up on the stage addressing such a large group of people, when you are a private person whose creativity needs privacy, silence, and even secrecy in order to gestate the fiction?
What a wonderful question. I'm a very private person. I find it difficult to become public or to stand on stage or to shout in squares. And yet, against all that, I feel that now something has to be done in a different way. Words are not enough, or essays are not enough, speeches are too much sometimes. The whole idea of standing in front of so many people is foreign to me. And I go on the stairs there and I keep asking myself, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? Because I know what I have in my pocket now is not an essay and nor a speech, but a poem. Because the last two times that I was on stage in Kaplan Street, in the center of the demonstrations, I read a poem that I wrote that described the situation. And suddenly when I understood it's a poem, I could have given it different emphasis and I could read it or respond to it differently. Suddenly, even the people, the audience who was there, they were silent. I raised up my head because I read from a page and I hardly could see because of the light were in my eyes. But there was this murmur of many, many people, of a big animal there that is murmuring. And then I started to read and I heard my voice. And I mean, when I hear my voice, it's okay for me. I'm safe. But of course, again, don't mistake me. I prefer to write fiction, imaginary things, poems, rather than speeches or essays. I've been in such experience, you being a writer and a very good writer. Did you ever find yourself standing in front of many people, being totally exposed, yet feeling that you must do it?
Only in my nightmares. Only in my nightmares. I don't know. I've never been on stage at a protest. I've never, people don't necessarily I care what I would have to say, and I certainly wouldn't care what I would have to say to that. I've spent a lot of time, however, I almost want to say in the audience of protests, but there is no audience in a protest, right? I've spent, I guess, time protesting, but it's been very difficult for me to, I'm a novelist, and so I'm constantly narrating my protest to myself. I'm constantly saying, now the writer is in the streets protesting. Now the writer is making a left turn. Now the writer is making a right turn. I'm narrating it to myself. One, because crowds scare me. Crowds in Israel scare me. And secondarily, because there is some deep unreality to me functioning in the world. And I don't really feel like I'm a person in general. When I go to the store, when I ride the bus, when I ride the subway here, I kind of only feel like a person when I'm writing. And the protest just exaggerates that feeling of alienation. But I'm a very bad citizen. Excuse that answer. You know, I think that what you're pointing to, though, is one of the true fundamental, I mean, of so many differences, one of the true fundamental differences between the position of an Israeli writer and a writer from most other countries, but especially a very large country like the United States. A writer in Israel, especially a writer who has, whether through accident or purposefully, found themselves in political subjects, becomes a public figure by default. And you've been a public figure from the earliest days of your career. I mean, when you were, if I have to remind you, when you were on the radio. So I think my question about the protests and how you feel with doing that is a more local expression of the larger question of how you have balanced being this public figure with the private imagination that that produces your books.
My friend, my late friend Amos Oz, who probably was here in the 92nd state, why? He once said, he told it to me and to many others, he said, I have on my table 2 pens. In one of them I write articles, in the other I write my fiction. So I cannot make this distinction. I'm writing with 1 pen, usually pens that I steal from hotel rooms. And I do it because it's the same person. I mean, I am the same one who wrote this essay. I'm the same one who stood on stage in front of so many people and read a poem, God forbid, because I was just looking desperately for a crack in reality to penetrate from and to discover a new way of being in this life. What is more satisfactory? As I said, writing book, writing novels, imagination work.
I wanted to know how most of the Israeli writers and poets, or many of them of my generation, have left Israel. They live in the diasporic, the re-diasporized communities of Berlin. They live in New York. They live, God forbid, in Los Angeles and Miami, but we forgive them that. That's for climate purposes. And I want to know how you relate to the enormous numbers of Yordim, of people who leave Israel and commit what is seen sort of as the sin of leaving Israel, and especially those who are engaged culturally and politically in what could be regarded as the Israeli left. What would you have to say to them?
This is painful to see all these young, bright, brilliant people going out of Israel. Is painful. It's also dangerous because these people could have contributed so much to the future of Israel, to the character of Israel. And they left, and I cannot judge them. They do what is good for them, and maybe they are right and I'm wrong. I'm not leaving, at least for the time being. I don't know, maybe there will be here a reality that will force people like myself to leave. I hope it will never come. But I do not leave this place because it's relevant for me. Everything that happens here is relevant, from the terrible, worst things until the most noble and beautiful aspects of life. And there are beautiful and good moments in Israel even today. Not enough, I'm afraid, but there are. And I want to live my life in a relevant way. I know it sounds like a very pompous expectation from life, but I really want to live relevant life. I want to live in a place that the language would be relevant for me, the associations would be relevant, the character of the people and what they do and why they do what they do is relevant for me. the whole syntax of reality, the way people treat each other. I know it. I know why they act the way they do. I know why they are making the mistakes that they are doing. I can take wonder in the way they are courageous, some of them, in continuing to be here. And since life is outrageously short, I want to live my life only in a relevant surrounding, only in a place that almost everything that happens means something to me, obliges me to do something relevant.
I want to take a swerve here, which I hope you'll forgive me for doing, especially on Yom HaShoah. But there was an Israeli stand-up comedian who gave what I thought was the first truly good October 7th joke. He said, a lot of people, they're comparing Hamas and the Nazis, Hamas and Nazis, but say what you will about the Nazis, at least they never killed Holocaust survivors. And I thought at least that was a wonderful joke. I wanted to ask you about your connection to humor. I know that your horse walks into a bar, is the monologue of a stand-up comedian whose reaction to all of the pain is an access of humor. I'm also aware that talking about humor is possibly the least funny thing that one can do, but I still wanted to ask you about where you see the consolations of humor.
Different topics you raised here. First of all, humor. Humor is, it's the breath of life for me. Humor means flexibility, means being able to change your point of view and to surprise yourself and to surprise the people who hear you and show the points of flexibility and of independence and sovereignty even in the way you look at the world. You are not being crushed or imprinted by authorities, any kind of authority, but you can create your own constitution, so to say. And yes, in Horse Walks into a Bar, there is Dovale, who is a rundown comedian that slowly tells us a tragic story while he's telling jokes all the time to distract people from the fact that he's feeding them with a serious, heavy stuff. And slowly he becomes himself. He's able to talk to himself and to his audience with his authentic voice. And it was, by the way, a character that I really loved to write. There are many jokes in the books, and since the book is out in some editions now in some countries in the world, people keep sending me jokes, new jokes to insert into this book. They said, no, every joke here is calculated. You laugh, but it's calculated. So humor is inevitable, yes, and actually when you are suffocated, if you laugh, it's also a way of breathing, of being able to breathe. And since we have very little reasons to laugh in Israel, in the Middle East, I'm yearning for every sign of humor, of this feeling of freedom, that we are free, that we can laugh, that we are not subjugated to the tyranny of hatred, of racism, of all of these poisonous materials that we are being fed by.
The suggestion of poisonous materials, I think, brings me to this question about what I think an American audience, especially an American Jewish audience that is around the why, is particularly interested in, which is to say our relationship to Judaism, Jewishness, however you want to call it, in the United States is largely religious. And it's precisely the religious aspect of the state that seems to be crushing the hope of democracy in Israel. And I wonder for a moment if you could speak outside of your Israeliness to a Jewish principle and to speak about the role of the religion itself in the state, and somehow relate it to the way in which Jews in the diaspora need that religion in order to define their identity for themselves. Because without that identity in the diaspora, all we have in the diaspora is Israel. And so I wonder how you relate to the way that Jews in the diaspora relate to their religiousness.
I think the answer that you gave is better than the question. And by the way, it's for you to answer as a Jew from the United States more than for me. But may I speak about religion in general before I speak about the need for, or the symptoms of religion in the United States, which again, you know more than I do. I'm an atheist. I'm very, very Jewish, and it's usually when there are referendums of who are you more, Israeli or a Jew? It's a very popular question. I say I don't want to choose. I'm both. I'm a product of the meeting of these both. And for me, being a Jew means to have no God, to be able to live without the help of a kind of a superpower that regulates us and protects us or demands things from us. I need to be without a God. It's important for me to be godless because I don't want to believe that there is something that buffers between me and reality. There is nothing. There is only harsh desert of nothingness that we have to fill with our values and our abilities and our passions and our humor, everything. But it's on us to create. I can understand the psychological need for having for being religious, for having a God. I know it's comforting. 19 years ago, my family and I, we lost our son Uri in the Second Lebanon War. And I saw how other people, Jewish people, Israeli Jewish people, how they react in a different way to this fact, this terrible fact. It was much easier for them because there was the presence of God, there was kind of an explanation, quote unquote, to what happened to them, to the family, to Israel, to their beloved one who was killed. And I don't want discomfort from above. I want to be bereft of all options of self-defense. I want to stand naked in front of this reality. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. By the way, I should tell also that for the last 34 years, I have a chavruta. Chavruta, you know what it is. It's usually two, we are three people who study the Bible with magnifying glass, as Jews have done throughout their life, for their history. So I have a sentiment for people who believe that they need to be protected from life. But if I have to choose, I will choose a godless life, and I will demand it to be non-existent.
I mean, do you believe that that politically speaking, the people who bring drag religion into Israeli politics, on the popular names to say are Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but also the general Haredi community and their own resistance to serving in the army, for example, do you think that they regard the presence of God in their lives as a means of, let's say, self-defense against the scary realities of Israeli life?
It's deeper than that, and I respect the need to be protected and the need to organize your life in a way that you handle the keys to your identity and your activities to another power bigger than you, stronger than you. But I cannot use it. I'm too sober for believing in this option. And as I said, not only that I am accepting it, I demand it. I demand to be without God. I think this is maybe the first test that human being has. how to live without a God.
And in the future of Israeli society, which is rapidly becoming more religious, and both through the fact of birth rates, but also through affinity, do you see the possibility of a theocracy on the horizon?
The horizon is very dark and frightening. Regarding the behavior or the attitude of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, I must say that I regard it as the greatest sin, almost a crime that Benjamin Netanyahu did in his career, to whitewash the personality and the beliefs of these two people, and allowing them to be so influential, and to see how they are really breaking any chance for improving the relationship between Jews and Arabs, and to see how they are drunken with their own power and their beliefs. It's really, I choose my word here, but it is a criminal act to allow these people to decide upon our future. They are fascist and they are hateful, and what they do is to infiltrate all the time the terrible contents of hatred and fascism.
I wanted to ask one question that is just a particular interest of mine, and I wanted to unite the political and literary sides of our conversation here. And that question has been, it revolves around the idea that the right wing doesn't read. And I wanted to ask about that. Yeah.
Doesn't read, you said?
Yeah, doesn't read literature. I wanted to ask why the right doesn't read literature, or why the right hasn't had a literature in over half a century.
Well, I'm not sure that they are not reading. When I was writing The Yellow Wind, this is something almost 40 years ago, I wrote that in their libraries you see only sacred books and not novels, and they were furious with me, and they said, you did look at our other rooms at home, and there are piles and piles of books.
You didn't go in our bedrooms.
I believe them, and I think, there are people who love to read and to write, and some of them are sending me their manuscripts to read, and they are very responsive. And yet I think that in order to be right-winger, you have to buffer yourself from a great part of reality, and this is the part that the left, or the literature provides, which is the power to do. I think that in order to not know what they are doing, the settlers, in not knowing what verdict they put on our being here, and the danger they create for the Hebrew, the Jewish identity here, and in order to live more literary life, it means to be exposed to the nuances of life. And I think also this is the great pleasure of writing, by the way, that in a world that is so thick, we are creating something thin and delicate and precise. There is a pleasure in doing precise thing in a world that is murky world. And the settlers, who again, I do not underestimate their intellectual abilities and thirst, but in order really to be able to create what they are doing in occupying and ruling over millions of people who do not want them and who do not have any other hope in life, if in order to do that, you have to give up on some of your more delicate abilities.
It becomes a blunted thing, a blunted instrument. Well, I was hoping that we were going to get through this entire hour-long conversation without mentioning Benjamin Netanyahu, but it seems that you, that you brought him into the conversation. I wanted to ask then one question about whether you think that there will be elections this next year, and whether you think that there is any hope of unseating him, and whether you think that whoever would be in his stead would be any better.
How can I predict? I know about it no more than you do. I might have a feeling of the anger and the rage of the streets against Netanyahu. I am afraid of what will happen here if he will be accused of the accusation that are held against him. Violence has been engraved in such depth in our being, our national and private personal being, that violence and the worst kind of violence might erupt. But also we might see that the expertise of Mr. Netanyahu is to inflame a situation and to create situation of hatred and of brutality. And he feeds on that. He functions brilliantly in such situations. And that's what I can say now, because of course the future is not us to see, as the song says.